Hi, everyone. So I have here Carolyn Zaikowski. She's a friend of mine and also a YouTuber and an author. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Carolyn. The YouTube channel, I talk about personality typology and some related stuff. I'm a writer. I've written 2 books, kind of experimental prose, poetry, novels, and a bunch of other stuff. So I'll give you my links, my related links and information. But yeah, I think that's the most interesting stuff.
You're human. I don't know.
I'm a death doula. That's something I don't really talk about on my YouTube channel. I hang out with dying people. I don't know. I'm a teacher. I'm going crazy during lockdown is what's happening right now. So
Yeah. Actually, that makes me think. First, can I start with a spontaneous question? Because
Totally.
you had asked me about experiences in lockdown as a type 9 and what's going on. Do you feel like anything 4 specific is happening for you, or do you just feel like general stuff?
Well, it's sometimes hard I have this theory or this saying, type is not a theory of everything. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on, but I'm 4ing it up. I'm in the 4s. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. Like, I've never experienced anything like this before. Like, we've been in this situation for like 4 months now. I was saying in our other video, like, we're in Massachusetts, which is one of the epicenters. And yeah, I just feel like I'm floating untethered. It's very, very easy for me to feel like I don't exist, but existentially, like that I existentially am just, like, sometimes I'll actually look in the mirror and be like, okay, you're here, you're good. It was harder. We got easier in the summer. But yeah, I was going into some pretty 4 in a bad place stuff in the colder weather. Depressive. I struggle with a lot of just negative outlook kind of stuff that I'm trying to work on. So
Yeah, I feel like the coronavirus, the isolation is probably just bringing out everyone's stuff, whatever it is.
I'm sure. I would love to just get a whole like panel of each type and ask them like, how is your Enneagram type interacting with lockdown?
Yeah, I bet there would be, I had a hard time with that question, but I bet there would be stuff that would be brought up that I would relate to, probably.
For sure.
So anyway, my actual planned first question was to ask you when and how-ish you got into Enneagram and MBTI, and like if one came first and what that was like.
Well, it's funny. So I'm 37 now. And the first person I ever met who knew about the Enneagram, I was in college, and it was a professor, a psychology professor who studied it really. Like, I would consider her an expert and an Enneagram teacher, and she's one of my close friends now. But she kind of spied me out in a class. She's a 4. And there was kind of a professor-student boundary, so I think she didn't really want to project too much, but she was like, you should just go read about the Enneagram because you're really a 4. And to this day, she tells this story about the first time she ever met me. I had a black sweatshirt on with a red heart that I had cut out myself and sewed on, and it was all disheveled, and I sewed it on the wrong side. And she said the second she saw me, she was like, oh God, I need to talk to this person about the Enneagram. So people might be surprised to hear that for like 2 years, I was reading about it and telling her, like, this is total BS. Like, you're in a cult, stop calling people numbers. Like, I would make fun of her. I was really kind of anti-Enneagram for like a good 2 years. And she gently and I also didn't think I was a 4. I was really convinced I wasn't, that I was a 2 or a 1. And The thing that sold me on it finally was that I realized my mother's type, which is 9, and it blew my world open. Like, I could not believe the sheer usefulness, like just the sheer usefulness. Like, my relationship to my mother fundamentally changed. I didn't even tell her about the Enneagram. I just realized, like, oh, she's really triggered by me because I'm a 4. Like, and I'm really triggered by her because she's a 9 and we do that dance, the 4-9 dance. It revolutionized my relationship with a lot of my family members. And that was when I was finally like, okay, this system is so useful. The sheer usefulness is why I was sold on it. Like, I'm not, like, the pieces of the Enneagram that are more new agey or even esoteric, I'm not super interested in. Like, I'm only interested in it to the extent that it revolutionizes like relationships and provides a framework for introspection. And similar with the MBTI, I actually rejected the MBTI for quite a while because there were a couple of people who mistyped me, like, and kept insisting, like, they just were so insistent about it, and I was like, stop, like, I don't relate to this at all. You're just making me hate it. Like, please. And when I realized what my actual type was, it was a similar, like, wow, this is really like a potentially radical tool if it's used correctly. And that's one of the reasons I'm so adamant in my videos about using it right and like using it ethically, for the whole, like, if you use it wrong and you use it unethically, everyone hates it. Like, like, there's reasons why people really prickle at or even get offended by typology, and it's because putting people into boxes is not historically a very good thing that humans have done. And even there are some eugenicist concerns that I have about the way that typology can be used, and it's supposed to be about showing you the box you're already in and breaking you out of it. And so that is so, I just find that really, really cool to think about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like I've gotten a lot of value out of figuring out like family members types and how they interact with me, but yeah, I could definitely see how it could be like almost weaponized against people if you're so focused on what other people's types are and not using it for yourself, basically.
It's weaponized, and it goes against like what I mean. There's no precedent in any MBTI or Enneagram literature that says it should be used that way. Like, it is not. This isn't just my opinion. It's like, hey, this system is really supposed to be used for us to learn about each other and to grow and expand our consciousness and our senses of our, of ourselves. And it's not supposed to be just like one more random superficial thing that we're like, this type is a good type and that type's a bad type. It's an utterly incorrect use of the system. So when it's used right, it's such a cool tool. It's just a tool, is all it is, There are other tools, but this one really speaks to me.
Yeah, so most of my questions are about the Enneagram because I know more about it. And I don't actually know how you even feel about these comparisons, but I wanted to know if you feel like the MBTI and the Enneagram, and really anything you wanted to say about it comparatively, or if they're like equally valuable, and specifically if there's like a system that you would be more likely to recommend if someone doesn't know anything about any of this, or not.
I think that's a really great question, and it's useful for like people on YouTube who are coming across these videos and like not knowing where to start. So, I mean, two things occur to me. One is that one major difference, well, they're completely different systems, first of all. Like, they come out of completely different traditions. They have a completely different paradigm in terms of like the question of what is it that creates personality? What is personality? Completely different. So any overlap between types like is an accident. And not that there aren't some correlations, but any type on one system can theoretically be any type on the other system. And I've seen some wild combinations like you wouldn't, like when you see them in action, it's pretty cool to see. Like I know at least one legit type 5 INFJ. It's really rare, but it's a thing. So just as, or I know like some extroverted INTPs, which one might think isn't, or sorry, some extroverted type 5s, I meant to say. In any case, that's important to say that they're completely different. And one of the most crucial differences, which I don't know that people realize, is so the MBTI assumes health. Like the starting point for the MBTI is who are you at your most healthy or at least neutral normal state? Like who are you if you had all of the conditions in place to be who you would naturally be. And we have a growth path from there, and there's definitely stuff about like, okay, here's these like shadow qualities that you really need to be aware of that are gonna cause pain if you don't work on them. And but the starting point is like health, and it feels kind of positive and cool and empowering. The Enneagram in some ways sees personality as pathology and neurosis. Like in some ways, those 9 types are 9 types of pain and 9 types of suffering and 9 types of defense mechanisms that protect us from a core existential wound, where if that wound is exposed, we literally feel like we're going to existentially disappear. Like it is this terrifying thing to be poking at. And so, and the process, the assumption is that we actually have to loosen personality. Like personality is kind of a defense, and that we do these really gentle, like creative things to kind of loosen it and work towards like a larger sense of the self instead of this like neurotic stuckness. So for that reason, sometimes the Enneagram has gotten critiqued for being negative and for being over focusing on pathology. And it's a real, like the only way out is through system. Like to use the Enneagram, to really use it correctly, you need to be willing to just be like, all right, like, let's go there. Like, I'm going to look at my deepest stuff. And like, I've been using the Enneagram for almost 20 years now. And man, like the extent to which this stuff is unconscious is just amazing to me. Like I'm still seeing, like last year I recognized a type 4 layer that I don't even want to say because I actually still feel really vulnerable around it. But that I was like, oh my God, like how can I have been doing this for so long and not have seen the truth of that? Like, oh, you know, so not everybody wants to do that work, understandably. So yeah, it's an interesting difference. There's some other stuff that I think people see the Enneagram as more kind of spiritual and esoteric, and in some ways it is really explicitly that. But the MBTI is too. Like people think the MBTI is scientific. It's actually pretty much universally rejected by academia.
Yeah. I have read criticisms about it, but it seems like most of the criticisms are based on if you like tests, which I feel like is a criticism of the test, you know?
Well, and it's called an indicator, not a test. And they did that on purpose.
Yeah.
Very explicit in the training, this is not a test, we call it an indicator. And it's because you're really like, you're really supposed to figure out your type in both systems by studying it. Mm-hmm. The MBTI just indicates what your type might be. Like to use it the right way, you're actually supposed to study it, compare that result against the descriptions and ideally talk to some kind of expert to work it out. But there are type, the big five trait theory is taken seriously in academia. It's a trait theory, not a type theory, which is important. But any kinds of statistics that you see in the MBTI is usually the MBTI company compiled those statistics. I'm actually completely fine with that. Like, I don't think that it needs to be, like, it's useful anyway. And also, it's completely esoteric. It's based on Carl Jung. Carl Jung was the most, like, mystic, esoteric guy ever. So you could really get into that part of it if you wanted.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And I didn't know that. And it makes sense to me in terms of, I feel like if you try to pull someone in to get interested in the MBTI, they're kind of like, oh, cool, my cool, unique personality. But I always have a lot of disclaimers with the Enneagram where I'm like, this is hard though. Like, this is not there. And I really want everyone to understand that there aren't, like you said, there's no good types and bad types, but it's like, there's some really negative stuff about every type. And like, you're going to have to deal with that. Yeah.
No, for sure. I thought a lot about that when I was thinking about some of the questions you sent me, because there, especially with the Enneagram, there's this issue of health versus, I don't know, disintegration or whatever you want to call it, where so if you ever come across somebody who's like, this type, I like this type, I don't like this type, or wow, that type, is this kind of problematic, and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's an inherently incorrect view of the Enneagram. Like, the entire point of the Enneagram, like the whole friggin' thing is like, we are humans. We all have a way of suffering and causing suffering to other people. And we all have a really, really necessary, beautiful quality that opens up when we are healthy. A quality, it's called the virtues, which isn't something that's talked about a lot on YouTube. I've been meaning to do a video on it for like 5 years. But it's all about, like, this is 9 types of suffering. And every single person, when they are not doing well, is an asshole. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Like, they harm themselves and they harm other people. And every single person, when they're doing really well, is a beautiful person who, like, manifests empowerment and emotional intelligence and very high human spiritual and emotional qualities. So there's 9 types of neurosis in the Enneagram, and there's 9 types of so-called virtue. And so that's, we might have our own little personal triggers around a type. I'm not saying that that isn't valid. Like, there's a type, I'm not going to say because I don't want to alienate people. There is a type that I have a huge trigger around because it was my father's type. And, like, who doesn't have daddy issues? And it's a very specific type energy that, as an adult, like, I associate it with that. But that's my own projection. Like, that's my stuff. That's really different from a type being inherently problematic. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I relate to that in terms of feeling like, yeah, it's not inherent to the type. It's either I have like a history with this type, or just because of what type I am, there's a dynamic here that could be really difficult. And yeah, it depends. But and I feel like that makes sense also in terms of why I like the Enneagram versus the MBTI, because I feel like I get excited about, like, an opportunity for usefulness and, like, growth. Not that the MBTI is not useful, but the idea that it's, like, centered around how you are at different health levels is really, I think, useful. And I like that.
Useful. And, the MBTI can, when you actually get into the Jungian cognitive functions theory, which the MBTI is based on, that's actually a pretty complicated theory that can take a long time people get very flustered by that theory, and which is understandable. But the Enneagram is maybe a little more accessible in that way. Like, it has this really obvious, once you figure out your type, there's like a growth path, and it's like, here's what this type looks like when they're really not doing well. And here are some very concrete ways using different methods to get to the high quality. And so, yeah, I mean, I I would encourage people to realize, like, and again, this isn't my opinion, this is just literally the system, that if you're ever inclined towards being like, this type's cool, or like, I want to be that type, or you screw that type, I'm never going to date that type, like rein it in, because it's actually pretty unethical use of the system. And it's also just, it's not useful. Like, that's not the growth path. The growth path is like, first of all, we should always think, am I projecting? You know, it's one thing to be abused by somebody, but if someone's just like annoying or something like not really our style, it's pretty like emotionally responsible to be like, I wonder if I'm projecting something, or if I'm having a little association or trigger that I don't realize. Like, this probably isn't about the other person. And that it's really about the levels of health in the Enneagram is really important. I mean, there's types that are really obvious in their harmfulness when they're not healthy. Like type 6 or 8 can actually get like violent. And I'm talking like worst possible, like lack of health. There's, type 1s can get like so moralistic and angry. Type 4s can get, really self-absorbed and navel-gazing and like suicidal. But there's a couple of types that I think get like, people don't realize that it's also a type of harm. Like type 9 and type 5 come to mind. And not to pick on these types, I'm just trying to drive the point home that like withdrawing is also is a very serious type of harm, like to the self and to others. So when type 9 and type 5 aren't healthy, they literally can just walk away from people. Or, a lot of the people I know who've had the most complex trauma from their childhoods had a type 9 or 5 parent who just left. Or who, actual criminal levels of neglect, right? And it's like, so sometimes the harm from a type being unhealthy is the harm of like removal of self, which is a very difficult type of harm to notice. So just to drive the point home that goes for all the types. Like, it's not just like, oh, I met an 8 once who was really angry and beat someone up, and so they're like a bad type. And I met a 9 who just never rocked the boat, so they're a good type. Yeah, I think about that a lot. Keeps me up at night.
Well, that relates sort of to my next question, which was within the Enneagram specifically, like how figuring out your type has influenced you. And you could say like as much or as little as you want about that, but.
Yeah, I mean, like I take for granted now that I'm a 4, but I talk to other people sometimes who haven't pinned their type down yet, and I remember like, wow, there was a time during which I was so resistant at first to the idea of being a 4. I really like wanted to be a 1 because they're so idealistic, or like a 2 because, oh look, that's the helper, and it's frankly the like good way to be a woman in like a gendered patriarchy. So it was kind of, it was a little cringeworthy at first. I'm like, wow, you 4s are in the shame center anyway, and it was like, it was hard for me to accept some of this stuff that was true about myself. Like the Enneagram really holds a mirror up to you, like a pretty radical mirror. But ultimately it was validating too, because I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like there are a lot of people who are like this, and it's just a style. It's just the one way of a personal paradigm, or one pair of reality goggles, and other people have their own paradigm and their own way of suffering. Maybe I was just at the age that I hadn't realized that yet, but typology helped me so much in terms of normalizing who I am and who other people are. Like, it's okay that other people have these different paradigms, and it's okay that I have this one. And it helped me not feel like to have other fours in my life who like I'm a big proponent of the idea that type fours need other healthy type fours in their lives. That's been an amazing thing in terms of like helping me grow as, you know, being able to disclose some of this really dark force stuff that I don't feel comfortable disclosing to anybody, just anybody. So we do live in a world where type 4 is the cultural shadow in a lot of ways. So like I said, it's just one tool, right? I use a lot of other tools like Buddhism and mindfulness, like different types of therapy. But man, in terms of showing me that core, like really deep core wound, it's been the most powerful tool of just like allowing myself to see this like really hurt, like dark void area that I carry around with me, and tools for loosening it and soothing it a little bit. I mean, it's just been, that's why I'm such a proponent of like, use the system correctly, like type yourself correctly. It's like, if you can type yourself correctly, like there's this path, there's these very specific suggestions. And it's modified, like I won't say it's changed my behavior, but it's helped me be a lot more just skillful and less reactive, and to remember that like I have a reality and somebody else has one, and there's like a Venn diagram where we meet in the middle, and like that's okay. Like not everybody needs to be in my reality. I don't think I would have been able to do a lot of this work without also doing Buddhist mindfulness stuff and EMDR therapy at the same time. But I think back and I'm like, God, who would I be without the Enneagram? Like, I don't mean to sound like a cult leader, but like, gosh, when used correctly, it really is just such an incredible system. It really is.
I can really relate to finding the idea of finding other people who are, or figuring out that there are other people who act the same way and think the same way in these key ways. That makes you feel a lot just better in a lot of ways. Like, yeah.
And it's, we all think that our own neutral is normal, and like neutral and normal are not the same thing. Like, just because this, I remember my mind being blown by the Enneagram when I was like 19 or 20, because I was like, oh, wait, not everybody like exists in this like 7-dimensional kaleidoscope of like inner flavors of like every single possible manifestation of an emotion, and like not everybody is like thrown by these subjective emotional states and, you know, all the force stuff. And it was just like, wow. Like and partly because I'm an INFJ too, I'm like fascinated by other people's internal states, and like it was terrifying but really cool to realize like, wow, not everybody has this inner world. Yeah.
So I'm actually really interested in this next question, but I have no idea. I was going to ask if there's certain types that are harder to figure out than others for the Enneagram specifically.
Yeah, I mean, again, a really interesting question.
Like thinking about people that you don't, or you can answer it however you want, but I was thinking about like if someone you didn't know at all, because I know I should say for the audience that you do some consulting and helping people figure out their types. So
I really like this question. It makes me think about a lot of my attitudes about the Enneagram. So on the one hand, so the Enneagram is a type theory, not a trait theory, right? So this is really important. Like a trait theory is a theory of personality based on observable behaviors. So like this person is really gregarious in social situations, so they're an extrovert. Or this person wears a beret and like writes poetry, so they're this type, right? those are the systems that tend to be taken more seriously in academia, because you can study an external trait. Like, you can make statistics around it. A type theory is a theory of subjective inner states and motivations and the stuff you can't see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, Enneagram is a type theory, which means that it's about motivations, it's about defenses, it's about the stuff that's going on inside. And so that can manifest really like a lot of different things, right? So people will often think like, I'm depressed, so I must be a 4, or like, I'm really smart, so I must be a 5, is one that I have a real problem with from a eugenicism perspective, but I won't go off on that one. So people will mistake observable traits for type. And so in that sense, I'm really careful about assuming that, oh, this person's a 1 because they have a lot of morals, or like, oh, this person seems really low key, so they're a 9. I try really hard to like poke at what are your inner motivations for being low key, right? Like, what are your inner motivations for experiencing this anxiety? Because anxiety is a human trait. Intelligence, like depression, creativity, these are just human traits. So for Enneagram, it would be about what's your internal relationship to that trait? What's your internal relationship to why you wear a beret and dress in a super artsy way, like whatever, or play sports? So in that way, we need to be really careful about conflating someone's external presentation with their type and what's actually going on. That being said, if you've truly studied the system, and if you truly know certain things to be looking for, there are a few types who have a very hard time not just wearing themselves. Like, who have a hard time not showing themselves. And for me, those types tend to be 4, 6, and 8, which happen to be the so-called reactive triad, where they actually are externalizing their inner stuff. So we have 6s with this. Generally, I've met very few 6s who don't have a really palpable energy of like anxiety, or I call it the the triangulating reality in this very projected, often external processing kind of way. I know very few 4s who don't have what I playfully refer to as this.
I know someone who would like physically like, oh, it was a joke, but it was like, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Sorry.
I know maybe it's because I am a 4. I know very few 4s who are able to hide that they're a 4 in the way that you can't really hide what your skin color is or what your hair length is. It's kind of like that. So I see 8s. 8s is a similar kind of thing, usually. But you got to be careful with that, because people, I have the saying that I said it earlier, type is not a theory of everything. Like, people act differently in different contexts, right? Like, type is holistic. I might act, in some contexts where I'm out dancing or I used to like do acting, people might have thought I was a 7. That was one context, you know? People stuff and morph their personalities because of trauma is a huge one. Trauma, gender, like gender can just completely distort who we would naturally be. I can't tell you how many women I have met who just automatically thought they were a 2, or men who assumed they were a 5. So it's tricky. And the other thing I'll just say is that any type, when they're really, really, really unhealthy, is sort of like an exaggerated archetype, right? That maybe, again, if you know what you're looking for, like with the very, very unhealthy, people are often easier to type, I think. And very, very healthy people can actually be kind of hard to type, because the whole point of growth in the Enneagram is to loosen, like to loosen and become more present. And sometimes you can, I know meditation teachers, for example, who seem like they've started to channel all of the high virtuous qualities of all the types in a way that's like, does type even matter anymore? And that's kind of, I think it's rare, but that's kind of cool to see.
Wow, that's really interesting. So I was also going to ask how you try to approach either just explaining this to people or getting people interested, because I mean, for me, I feel like it's hard to say like you should get into this, but you're gonna have to read a lot, and like I just don't know how to initiate it, because it's not, people want to just take a test and figure out their type like in a few minutes, and it's not like that. So
like if you know how powerful the system is, it's like you want your partner, like your best friend or your mom, to know about it. This is really tricky for me, to be entirely honest. I don't know that I've ever admitted this publicly, but sometimes I don't talk about it on purpose, because people know I'm the typology person, and like people find out and like want to pick my brain about it when I'm like just really tired, or I'm like, I have to be ready to talk about it, because I want to talk about it in its full, like with the fullness that it deserves. Like, like what you just said, these are really, you need to study these systems. These are like years long journeys. Just using it as the like online test. I've never seen anybody correctly type themselves with the Enneagram online test. I don't think one time I've seen, and don't even get me started on the mistypings with the MBTI. You really need to like sit down with somebody who knows what they're talking about and work it out. And sometimes for years. And so I have a hard time reining that in, because I want to accurately represent it. I want people to get the most out of it. If you mistype yourselves, you can go on a totally weird, convoluted like growth path that's not applicable or could be harmful. Like, so I do find myself making a judgment call, like, am I at a party where a bunch of people are drinking and I'm like really tired? Maybe I don't want to talk about this, or maybe I'll redirect. Or maybe I'm talking to a person who seems like they're not going to be willing to do the extra study, or maybe there's somebody who is really interested in the system because they're really interested in the putting people in a box part of it, or like, I'm kind of like, maybe I shouldn't talk about this right now. But then there's people who just, it's so obvious that they are intellectually curious and like want to know about it for growth. Like with you and I, when we started talking about it, I was like, this is a person who like will really get into this on its own terms. So yeah, it's like, there's people who I really want to talk to about it, and then I realize like, oh no, this isn't happening. They don't care.
Yeah, I feel that way about lucid dreaming. I usually don't enjoy talking about it. It's like when you're really like kind of an expert in something, it's not always fun to talk about in a casual way, because then you're in a teaching mode, and that's like really effortful and hard.
Honestly, like, this is super weird to say. I wonder if you experience this with lucid dreaming. Like, you do know more about lucid dreaming than almost everybody. Like, there's a very small percentage of the population who knows as much about lucid dreaming as you do. Like, objectively. And like, it's kind of a similar thing with typology. There's people who know a lot more than I do, but like, I'm in the like upper, percentile.
The odds of meeting those other people just aren't that high in real life. Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be really difficult to like, to just like, sometimes I just want to be like, no, you have that totally wrong. Like, that's not it. And like the intellectual part of me gets like, how do I say this to somebody versus like just let them take their own journey. So like having, I don't know if I would call myself an expert, like that feels weird, but like I do sometimes, I'm like, if you want to know what information I have to offer you, like cool, but like I have been known to just be like tough love, like you're not right about that, and like if you want me to tell you more, like let's do it. But there's a level of defensiveness that people get that just like doesn't allow for a type journey, for lack of a better phrase. And so I come up against that, and I can get prickly about that. That's my problem. Like I need to work on that.
I guess I have trouble because at where we live, so many people are into astrology, and I'm like, it's a completely different thing, but it's like it makes me want to talk about personality type because it's like it's like that's the paradigm, and I'm like, I want you guys to get into this one. I like this one. So I feel like it comes up a lot in my brain just because people are always like, well, you're a Taurus. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about that.
You go on that rant.
I don't know if I would alienate people on the internet, but
I'll just say for people who don't, why would you know? We live in Western Massachusetts. It's like real, I don't know, it's like Boulder, Colorado, or like it's like one of these little bastions of kind of new age and like holistic stuff.
And a lot of queer people are really into astrology too.
Yeah.
So that's another thing.
I have opinions about astrology.
Yeah, same. Maybe we could, that's like a whole other conversation, I guess. I don't know.
I'm a quadruple Sagittarius.
Really?
Sun and moon and two of my planets. And don't at me, as the kids say. I don't relate to it at all. It's one of these things. I was mistyped as an ENFP at the beginning of my typology journey, and that's the thing where I was like, stop, like this is not useful for me, and it's really frustrating that people are trying to tell me that I'm like this when I know that I'm not. I have a similar relationship to some astrology communities. I'll just say that.
Yeah. The only thing I really like about it is that I guess people talking about serious stuff right away.
Oh, I love that.
It's one of those things where people are like, yeah, let's get right into it. Or like tarot is another way to be like, what are you most worried about, thinking about right now?
You know, and that's like, I mean, the general idea of divination speaks to me. Like, maybe astrology doesn't count as divination, but like using an oracle card or a tarot card or some kind of ritual or symbol or idea to poke at your subconscious, right? Like that is really useful, I think. Like, I don't believe in tarot, but these, like, it's like externalizing your subconsciousness onto a symbol. It's like showing you yourself in a way that's really cool. I think there's probably an element of astrology that does that I don't completely understand. I've just met people in the astrology world who were really judgy. Like, I dated somebody who said, wow, I had told myself I was never going to date a Sagittarius again. And I was like, really? Really?
Yeah.
Are you 10 years old emotionally? So sorry. I know I have a lot of viewers who are into it, and I'm going on a little.
I mean, I probably shouldn't even be bringing all of those things from different cultures up in the same sentence. It's just that we do live in a place where it's very popular.
Totally.
It's just a thing.
Place where everybody, you know, thinks they're a certain MBTI or Enneagram type that they
yeah, very big on Tinder. Everyone wants you to know what their type is. Yeah. Okay, so my last question, which we can keep talking about. My last question was if there are big like misconceptions, pitfalls, anything. I know it's a huge question, but if there's anything you want to just like squash about.
It's important, and I mentioned a few of them. The type is not a theory of everything one is probably the most important one in terms of like really looking really close at how things like gender, trauma, culture, religion, family systems, capitalism, social oppressive social systems, like how these make us act or feel certain ways, that may or may not be personality related at all. That's one. The whole issue of like, this is about breaking out of a box that you're in and not putting yourself in a box. That is so important. It is so important. If you find yourself doing the putting people in a box one, you have to scrap everything you know about the system and rewire your orientation to it so that it becomes liberating for yourself and other people. What I mentioned about trait versus type, I did a video on this, but that's a really important kind of mix up. People don't understand that this is a system about the internal world and how the internal world affects observable traits and behaviors. This isn't just a surface system where you can say, you know, that person acts XYZ, so therefore this is their type. Not that there are never correlations between type and behavior. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it is so much more wildly dynamic and cool, frankly, than that. Like, it's so much cooler when you can get past the sort of stereotyped, like, surface level. That's a big one. Not studying how the system actually works, really just kind of like doing the fun part of it, or the take the test and then I'm a this type part of it. The system is so cool and so dynamic if you really commit yourself to studying it. And I'm not just saying like read a book, I'm saying like the deep dive, like the INFJ deep dive of like years of study. Like, you could study this system for 50, 100 years and you would still find more to work with. And that's one of the strengths of this system. And it's just like this endless, glorious labyrinth of self-growth and learning about other people. And do that. Like, don't stop at the surface. That's a big, thing I would encourage people on. And I think, the other general theme I was talking about with like, no type is inherently good or bad, and all types have the equal capacity to be abusive to themselves and other people, to be sociopathic level abusive at one extreme, or suicidally depressed or debilitated by trauma anxiety at one extreme. And all types have the capacity to be the Buddha level enlightened and beautiful at the other extreme. So like, that's also one of the absolute coolest and most potentially radical things about these systems that just gets thrown out the window when we don't honor like the complexity of system. And so I would just really encourage that kind of set of attitudes. I think that's probably my biggest. Yeah, I hate to sound negative, like everyone's doing it wrong. It's almost like the opposite. Like, wow, look at how much potential there is here if we do it in a certain way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I just really like asking people who know a lot about something what the misconceptions are. I feel like that's a good place to learn. I don't know. Yeah, so that was all. Those are all my questions. Do you have anything else you wanted to add before we go?
I don't think so. This is fun. This is just, it's really nice to just be able to talk with someone else who cares about this.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we already mentioned, but I can't remember because we made 2 videos. This one will be on my channel. One will be on your channel. I'll link to that. I think that's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm sad we aren't doing this in person, but we'll have a distance hangout soon outside on the bike path or something.
Yeah. Cheers.
Lockdown.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Elliot.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
This is